Sometimes a kingdom begins with half a loaf in the rain. The city of Ibadan had always lived in rhythm with the rain. During the long season of storms, the flyovers turned into rivers of steel and concrete, each Danfo bus groaning as it fought its way through traffic, horns blaring like frustrated trumpets. Gutters overflowed until brown water cascaded into the streets, dragging along scraps of paper, nylon bags, and broken sandals. Traders stood under makeshift nylon shelters, their voices raised above the thunder as they tried to sell roasted corn, akara, and steaming sachets of hot pap to commuters caught in the downpour. The air was a cocktail of roasted maize smoke, wet earth, and exhaust fumes, all tied together by the constant drumming of water against zinc rooftops. Beneath the third ring flyover, where the poorest sought refuge from the rain, the world felt smaller, darker, yet strangely alive. Here, among broken mats and rusted iron poles, lived Arinze, a beggar in his late 20s. He had the wiry body of a man used to hunger, and the quiet, watchful eyes of one who had endured more than words could capture. A thin scar cut across his temple, partly hidden beneath his tangled hair, as if the city itself had once tried to erase him. His battered tin cup lay beside him, collecting not only spare coins but also droplets of rainwater that trickled through cracks in the flyover. On this night, he held half a loaf of bread in his hands, stale but precious, the only food he had managed to secure after a day of pleading at bus stops and market gates. As Arinze prepared to take his first bite, a faint whimper cut through the noise of the rain. He lowered his gaze and saw a dogskin stretched over ribs, fur matted from storms, eyes dim with hunger. The animal trembled as it approached, its tail tucked, its legs weak, as though every step cost it a piece of life. For a moment, Arinze stared, torn between the desperate hunger in his own belly and the pleading eyes of the creature. Then, with a sigh heavy enough to carry years of pain, he broke the bread in two. "Eat," he whispered, extending his palm. The dog sniffed, then licked the bread from his hand before chewing clumsily, crumbs mixing with the rainwater on the ground. Arinze smiled faintly as he watched, and it was the kind of smile that revealed who he truly was beneath the dirt, and the hunger merciful, selfless, willing to sacrifice comfort for compassion. It was then he noticed the dog's collar, cracked and rusted, barely holding together around its neck. On the brass tag, nearly obscured by grime, was an insignia faint but unmistakable, a crown flanked by palm leaves, the royal emblem of Ibadan. Arinze frowned, confused. What was a palace dog doing here, abandoned in the storm, scavenging like a stray? From across the road, someone else noticed too. Amaka, a young tea seller who ran a small stand under the flyover, had been watching Arinze all evening. She had seen him before, sleeping curled against his tarp, muttering to himself in restless dreams. Tonight, as she poured steaming tea for commuters huddling from the rain, she paused, pulled out her small phone, and recorded the moment: the beggar, the bread, the dog's grateful eyes. Something about it struck her deeply. In a city where survival often made people cruel, here was a man who had nothing, yet still gave. She posted the clip quickly, thinking little of it. The internet, she knew, had its own hunger for stories like this. What neither she nor Arinze realized was that two men in a tinted SUV were also watching. Parked a few meters away, their engine idling softly, they photographed not only the dog's collar but also Arinze's scarred face. One of them murmured into a phone, "We've found him." The dog chose. The dog, however, seemed oblivious to all this intrigue. After finishing the bread, it wagged its tail and licked Arinze's hand, then padded slowly into the rain. Arinze, weary and soaked, crawled beneath his tarp, hugging what little remained of his bread. His stomach growled, but his conscience was strangely light. Within minutes, he was asleep, curled on the damp ground, unaware of the storm of attention gathering around him. Not far away, in the illuminated halls of the palace, another storm was brewing. The Alafin of Ibadan had breathed his last breath. His body lay in state, shrouded in white cloth, surrounded by elders chanting dirges and priests sprinkling libations. The throne of gold, centuries old, gleamed faintly in the torchlight. Yet the throne was empty, and with it, the city's future was uncertain. The king's death had not only left a void of leadership, but had also reignited a bitter succession war. At the heart of it all was a mystery: the mercy oath. The late Alafin had decreed long ago that no one would ascend the throne unless the test of mercy was fulfilled. Some elders mocked it as a tale meant for children, others whispered it was sacred, none could ignore it. It was said that when the time came, the palace mastiff trained to recognize kindness would guide the people to the one worthy of the golden throne. Whoever fed the hungry, unasked, and without witness, would be called forth. Few believed the clause would matter. After all, power in Nigeria had always favored bloodlines, wealth, and force. But that night, under the flyover, in the drumming rain, the oath awoke. The dog that Arinze had fed did not wander aimlessly. It trotted into the storm, crossed markets and alleys, until it reached a police patrol. The officers frowned, recognizing the brass tag. One knelt, scanning the microchip. Their radio crackled almost immediately. Palace property, escort back to base. The dog, however, barked and tugged toward the flyover, refusing to leave without returning to the beggar who had fed him. By the time dawn approached, whispers had already reached the palace. The mastiff had chosen someone. Some elders muttered prayers, others plotted their countermoves. Among the schemers was Prince Adedayo, the late king's ambitious nephew, who believed the throne was his by blood. His polished smile masked the fury burning inside him. If the dog had found someone else, someone outside the bloodline, it would ruin everything. Under the flyover, Arinze stirred in his sleep, unaware that the rain-soaked city was already shifting around him. Police sirens wailed in the distance, blue and red lights flashing brighter as they drew near. Amaka, still serving tea, watched as vans rolled up, their tires splashing puddles into the air. Officers stepped out, boots striking the wet asphalt, their torches searching under the flyover. They found Arinze curled beneath his tarp. One officer nudged him with a baton. "Wake up!" Arinze blinked, groggy, shielding his eyes from the torch. "What is it?" "I've done nothing wrong." The officer's voice was steady, almost reverent. "You're coming with us to the palace." The storm outside roared louder, as though the sky itself knew that Ibadan was about to witness a story no one had expected: the journey of a beggar from underpass shadows to the golden throne. When a stray wears a crown's collar, every eye becomes a witness. The convoy that carried Arinze away from the underpass moved slowly through Ibadan's wet streets. Sirens off, but their presence no less commanding. Rain washed over the windshields in silver sheets, wipers beating frantically to keep vision clear. Commuters, still awake in the storm, pressed to the sides of the road, whispering as the vans passed. A rumor spread as quickly as the water rushing through the gutters. Police had picked up a beggar. Some said he was a thief, others swore he was a madman. Only a handful whispered about the dog, the brass tag glimmering faintly in torchlight as it trotted proudly beside the convoy, refusing to be carried or leashed. By the time the vehicles reached the gates of the Alafin's palace, a small crowd had already gathered. Traders abandoned their stalls, cyclists parked their okadas, and elders leaned on canes, murmuring prayers and gossip in equal measure. It was not often that a beggar was escorted into the palace by uniformed officers, and certainly not with the royal mastiff, Ola, padding along like a herald. The brass tag on his collar had been wiped clean at the station. Now the royal insignia of Ibadan gleamed under the floodlights, undeniable proof of his belonging. The palace guards stiffened when they saw the animal. Recognition widened their eyes, and they bowed their heads slightly. "Ola," one of them whispered, "the Alafin's companion." The name carried weight. Ola was no ordinary dog. He had been trained to walk beside kings, to sit in the halls of judgment, to guard the golden throne during council. If Ola had wandered to the city and chosen a beggar, then the whispers of the old mercy oath could no longer be dismissed as fable. Inside the courtyard, the officers presented Arinze to Chief Priestess Ijeoma, a tall, commanding woman wrapped in flowing white cloth, her neck adorned with layers of coral beads that rattled softly with each movement. Her face was stern, marked by years of ritual and burden, yet her eyes carried an unsettling clarity, as though she could pierce through pretense with a glance. She studied Arinze silently, then lowered her gaze to Ola, who had pressed himself at Arinze's feet. The dog refused to move, even when guards tried to coax him away. Instead, he growled at them, then rested his head against Arinze's legs. The priestess's voice cut through the rain. "The clause has spoken," the crowd murmured. Arinze shifted uncomfortably, still damp, still dressed in torn clothes from the underpass. "What clause?" he asked, his voice hoarse from disuse. Ijeoma's gaze settled on him. The mercy oath. When the Alafin foresaw corruption tearing at this kingdom, he placed a condition on the throne. He declared, "He who feeds the unguided, hungry, unasked and unseen, shall be brought before the golden throne, for mercy is the only crown that endures." The oath was sealed with the palace mastiff as witness. "Tonight, you fed Ola. Therefore you must stand before the throne." The words rolled across the courtyard like thunder. Some elders crossed themselves with disbelief. Others muttered angrily. Among them, one man stood apart, his robe pristine, his agbada woven with threads of gold, his face a mask of calm concealing storm. Prince Adedayo. He was the late king's nephew, and in his eyes, the throne was already his. To see a beggar brought forward by a dog felt like insult, mockery, and betrayal combined. He smiled, bowing politely to the priestess, but his jaw clenched behind the facade. Inside, rage churned. "Surely," he said smoothly, "this is a misinterpretation. Tradition cannot be placed in the hands of strays and street rats." Ijeoma's eyes narrowed. "Tradition placed this clause, not I. The Alafin himself sealed it. You know this, Prince." Adedayo's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered, raising his hands in feigned concession. "Of course. Let us follow the will of the ancestors. But we must also preserve dignity. Bathe him, dress him in white. If he must be paraded as candidate, then let him at least not shame the halls with rags." The order was carried out. Servants led Arinze away, stripping his wet clothes, washing the grime of years from his body. He was given a plain white robe, the traditional garb of purification, symbolizing truth and humility. He emerged, transformed, though his scar still cut across his temple like a reminder of wounds the city had dealt him. Ola padded beside him, tail wagging, refusing to leave his side. Outside the palace, the world was already catching fire. Amaka's video of the bread sharing had exploded online. Uploaded quietly in the night, it now spread across feeds and group chats. The comments section was a war zone. Some called it a divine sign, proof that mercy still mattered in a corrupt age. Others dismissed it as staged, a trick engineered by opportunists to smuggle a beggar into royalty. "Who is this Arinze?" strangers demanded. "Where did he come from?" Conspiracy theories multiplied. Politicians, journalists, market women, all had an opinion. By morning, Arinze's face was on every screen in Ibadan. Yet inside the palace, he sat quietly in a side chamber, the weight of stairs pressing down on him. He had not asked for this. He did not want the eyes of a city upon him. All he knew was that he had fed a dog because it was hungry, and now his life was unraveling into something he could not control. The elders gathered in the council hall, their voices rising in debate. Some demanded that the oath be honored, fearing divine retribution if ignored. Others argued it was impractical, dangerous to let a beggar near the throne. Yet even they could not deny what they had seen. The dog refused all but Arinze. Ola would not eat from other hands. He would not move from Arinze's feet. It was as though he had sworn his own loyalty. 3 days remain until coronation, Ijeoma reminded them, her voice carrying finality. By then, the oath must be tested. Mercy cannot be mocked. If this man is unworthy, the throne itself will reject him. Meanwhile, Inspector Halima, a sharp-eyed police officer known for her incorruptible record, requested access to palace financial ledgers. "If the succession is to be honored," she told the elders, "then it must be clean. No throne can stand on stolen wealth." Her request was met with resistance. Odogwu, the aging steward, shook his head. "These are palace matters. Outsiders cannot pry into them." But Halima did not relent. "Then expect the EFCC at your gates," she replied coldly. The tension in the room thickened, every word heavy with consequence. Arinze said nothing, though he felt the storm around him pulling tighter. He wanted to slip away, to vanish back beneath the flyover, where no one cared if he lived or died. Yet Ola's head rested firmly against his leg, pinning him to this fate. As arguments raged and debates circled, a sudden hush fell over the chamber. A servant entered, carrying a small chest wrapped in velvet, stamped with the late king's golden seal. He placed it gently on the table before the priestess. "From the Alafin's private chamber," he said, bowing low. He ordered it delivered at the time of succession. Gasps echoed. The chest was unmistakable, its seal untouched since the Alafin's passing. The inscription on its cover glimmered faintly under the torchlight. It was addressed not to the prince, not to the elders, not even to the priestess. It bore only one line: to the one who fed mercy. All eyes turned to Arinze as silence swallowed the hall, the weight of destiny now locked inside the chest, waiting to be opened. Some thrones are not inherited, they are answered. The palace chamber was hushed, every elder, priest, and attendant staring at the velvet-covered chest laid on the long mahogany table. Its golden seal, stamped with the insignia of the late Alafin, remained untouched since the day of his death. Even Prince Adedayo, usually brimming with smug certainty, leaned forward with barely concealed curiosity. The inscription had been read aloud moments earlier, and it rang in every ear like a drumbeat: to the one who fed mercy. Hands trembling slightly, Chief Priestess Ijeoma lifted the chest. She whispered an incantation, broke the seal, and slowly pushed back the lid. The contents shimmered in the lamplight: an ancient coral bead necklace, heavy with history, a brass key, its teeth engraved with geometric symbols, and a rolled parchment that, once unfurled, revealed a map drawn in fading ink. Across its surface was sketched a section of the palace most had only heard of in whispers: the Golden Room. Gasps rippled. Odogwu, the weary palace steward, pressed a hand against his lips. That room was locked before my grandfather's time. Ijeoma nodded gravely. And yet the key is here. The Alafin's will is clear. The one chosen by mercy must enter. Adedayo rose abruptly, his agbada swirling. This is madness. Are we to place the fate of Ibadan in the hands of a beggar led by a dog? Mercy may warm hearts, but it cannot govern kingdoms. This clause must be set aside. I will have my lawyers prepare an injunction by dawn. His words were polished, his tone measured, but the fury in his eyes betrayed him. The priestess turned her gaze on him, unyielding. Do as you wish, Prince, but remember, the law of man can be challenged in court. The law of oath cannot. Adedayo bit back a retort, knowing the elders watched his every move. His smile returned, tight and false. Very well, let the spectacle play out. 3 days until coronation. We shall see who survives those days. He bowed mockingly and retreated, but his hands curled into fists. Meanwhile, Ola rose to his feet, tail wagging, and nudged the brass key toward Arinze. Murmurs spread. Was the dog guiding him? With hesitant steps, Arinze picked up the key and studied the map. The corridors it depicted twisted through sections of the palace he had never imagined. At Ijeoma's command, 2 guards and the steward accompanied him, though Ola insisted on leading. Torch in hand, Arinze followed as the mastiff padded confidently through hidden passages. The walls bore faded murals, paintings of Alafin's past feeding the poor, judging disputes under palm trees, releasing prisoners during festivals. The images glowed faintly in the flickering light, each one a silent reminder that thrones were not built by blood alone, but by service. Arinze's steps slowed as something stirred within him. The faces in the murals seemed almost familiar, as if fragments of memory were hidden inside their strokes. He could hear, faint and fleeting, the echo of a lullaby, an old Yoruba tune sung in a voice soft and kind. He pressed his hand to his scarred temple, dizzy. For a moment, the storm of his life on the streets receded, replaced by a vision of a wide courtyard, laughter, and the glint of sunlight on polished beads. Then the image was gone, leaving only confusion. Odogwu noticed. You remember something? He asked. Arinze shook his head quickly. Only shadows, only echoes. Back in the council hall, Inspector Halima had wasted no time. With the commotion distracting the elders, she quietly slipped into the steward's office and retrieved a set of dusty ledgers. The numbers were damning. Vast sums recorded as charity allocations had been siphoned to shell accounts. She frowned, snapping photographs for her report. When she attempted to bring the matter before the elders, however, she met resistance. One elder coughed loudly, waving her off. We cannot discuss finances at such a delicate moment. The succession must come first. Halima's jaw tightened. Without accountability, succession is corruption. You know this. But their silence was answer enough. Too many had taken their share of the stolen funds. They would stall her investigation at every turn. Elsewhere in the city, Amaka had not left her phone since dawn. Her video of Arinze feeding Ola had exploded across social media, spreading faster than the floodwaters of the storm. She now filmed market women gathered at her stall, ululating and blessing the beggar. "He is chosen," one said, clapping her hands. "Mercy chose him. May he never hunger again." Amaka uploaded their words, adding her quiet voice to the recording. "Sometimes the least among us carry the weight of kings." Her own feelings confused her. Was this about justice, or about the quiet gentleness she had seen in Arinze's eyes? Arinze himself was torn. Each step deeper into the palace filled him with dread. He was a beggar, a man who had begged for crusts and scraps, who had fought hunger as his daily enemy. How could he possibly carry the burden of a kingdom? What right did he have to walk these halls, guided by a royal mastiff as if fate itself had chosen him? Doubt gnawed at him, heavier than hunger. Yet Ola never wavered. The mastiff pressed close, nudged him forward, growled when he hesitated, and rested his head against Arinze's hand as though to say, "You are not alone. The oath is real." By the time they reached the end of the mapped corridors, sweat glistened on Arinze's brow despite the cool stone walls. The door before them was carved with ancient proverbs. Mercy is justice crowned. He who spares the lowly preserves the throne. The brass key fit perfectly into the lock. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing the legendary golden room. The chamber glowed with candlelight, bouncing off gilded mirrors. At its center stood the golden throne itself, veiled in white cloth, untouched since the Aliphan's death. To one side, a chest lay sealed. To the other, statues of ancestors stood in eternal vigil. The air was thick, not with dust, but with reverence. Even the guards fell silent, unwilling to disturb the sanctity of the place. Arinze stepped forward slowly, heart pounding. He felt as if he were walking into a story older than himself, one that had been waiting for him before he even knew it existed. He reached out, fingers trembling, ready to lift the veil, but Ola froze. The mastiff's body stiffened, hackles rising, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His eyes locked onto a shadow in the far corner of the chamber. Someone else was there. The golden room, meant to test mercy, was already tainted with an intruder's presence. Arinze stopped in his tracks, the weight of destiny and danger pressing down as Ola growled louder, teeth bared. Gold shines most when shadows gather. The golden room was nothing like Arinze had imagined. When the heavy brass door creaked open, the torchlight revealed a chamber layered in centuries of secrecy. Gilded mirrors lined the walls, reflecting the wavering glow of oil lamps. Carvings of kings long gone stared with hollow eyes, their figures etched in wood and inlaid with brass. At the center loomed the golden throne, covered by a white veil so immaculate it seemed untouched by time or dust. Beside it stood a sacred chest, carved from Iroko wood and bound in copper, its locks sealed by the crest of the Aliphan. Arinze stepped inside hesitantly, Ola padding close, ears sharp, nose twitching. The silence was thick, broken only by the drip of water somewhere far above. For a moment, Arinze felt as though the room itself were breathing, watching him. He bowed his head instinctively, though no one had instructed him to, and whispered a prayer he had not spoken in years. Then came a sound barely perceptible, yet chilling in its clarity, a faint scrape against stone, followed by the subtle shift of weight. Arinze's eyes darted across the room, and that was when he saw it, a gleam of silver on the ground. He bent down and picked it up. In his palm lay a cufflink, polished, engraved with a single initial, A. His breath caught. There was only one man in the palace whose name began with that letter and carried such arrogance to mark it on jewelry, Prince Adedayo. Before he could process further, a shadow detached from the far wall. A masked intruder lunged forward, blade flashing in the dim light. Arinze staggered back, heart hammering, but Ola was quicker. The mastiff leapt, teeth sinking into the assailant's arm. A muffled cry echoed in the chamber. The intruder kicked desperately, managing to wrench free, and fled through a side passage, vanishing into darkness. Blood droplets glistened where Ola's teeth had struck. Shaken, Arinze clutched the cufflink tighter. Whoever that man was, he had been here to break the vigil, perhaps even to end Arinze's life before dawn. His mind raced. If he had sat on the throne, if he had lifted the veil in fear, the oath would have been broken, and all would have declared him unworthy. Instead, Mercy's test had shifted into survival's. He sat down heavily on the cold floor, back against the wall. The golden throne loomed before him, veiled, waiting. Tradition demanded he must not touch it until dawn, and though part of him longed to collapse into its comfort, he resisted. Hunger gnawed at him, exhaustion pressed his eyelids shut, but he refused. He would not dishonor the vigil. Elsewhere in the palace, Adedayo paced furiously in his chambers, his hand bandaged hastily. His voice, low and venomous, hissed to his henchmen. "This beggar has lasted too long. If the dog and the priestess continue to favor him, I will lose everything. End him tonight. Let no dawn see him alive." His men nodded, shadows sliding into the corridors like snakes. Yet Adedayo did not realize that eyes other than his loyalists were watching. Inspector Halima had spent the evening in the control room, reviewing hours of CCTV footage. But when she mapped the palace, she discovered blind spots deliberately cut angles around the Golden Room, the Hall of Records, and the Royal Vault. These were not accidents of architecture but designs of sabotage. "This is an inside plot," she muttered, marking coordinates on her pad. Someone high-ranking was erasing the palace's vision. Her instincts screamed one name: Adedayo. Meanwhile, in the stillness of the Golden Room, Arinze's hunger deepened until his stomach groaned audibly. He held his knees close, whispering to Ola for comfort. The mastiff whined softly, laying his massive head in Arinze's lap. The bond between them had grown fierce, almost sacred, yet man cannot live on loyalty alone. His hands trembled with weakness. Then, as if in answer, the door creaked, softly. Arinze sprang up, alarmed, ready for another attack, but it was not an assassin who entered, it was Amaka. She carried a small parcel wrapped in cloth, her eyes darting nervously. "I bribed a maid," she whispered. "They'll punish me if they know I came, but you'll die if you don't eat." She unwrapped akara balls and dried fish, simple food but rich compared to what he had survived on. Tears pricked his eyes as she pressed the food into his hands. For a moment, silence filled the space between them, heavy with unspoken words. Arinze whispered, "Why risk this for me?" Amaka smiled faintly, though fear still flickered in her eyes. "Because I saw who you are before they named you chosen. You gave when you had nothing. That is worth more than all their crowns." He ate slowly, grateful, her presence warming the frozen chamber. In the quiet hours that followed, they sat together on the stone floor, speaking in low tones. She told him of her father's debts, of nights she worked until dawn selling tea to survive. He told her of fragments of memory, of voices and lullabies that haunted him. In the midst of politics and intrigue, something fragile but powerful began to take root between them. Dawn approached, bells rang through the palace, deep and resonant, echoing across the city. Elders filed into the Golden Room, robes trailing, eyes stern. They looked to the throne, to the veil still untouched, and then to Arinze, seated on the floor in white robes, eyes heavy but steady. Ola rose and stood guard beside him, as though declaring he did not falter. The priestess lifted her staff. "The veil remains, the throne waits, the test of mercy stands unbroken. He has passed the vigil." A murmur swept through the chamber. Even those who had doubted were forced to acknowledge what they saw. The beggar had endured the night, resisted temptation, and honored the oath. Adedayo's jaw tightened, but he kept his fury masked. His day of reckoning had not yet come. Then, without warning, the heavy doors of the Golden Room banged open. A new force marched in, boots pounding, files clutched under armored arms. The insignia on their jackets sent chills through the air. EFCC, Economic and Financial Crimes Commission. Their leader, Mrs. Adebayo, lifted a thick folder and spoke with authority. "By court order, we are here to seize evidence of financial impropriety tied to this palace. Records already link offshore accounts and shell companies to one name, Prince Adedayo." Gasps filled the chamber as Adedayo's name rang out, his carefully built facade cracking under the weight of exposure. Arinze's vigil had ended, but a new battle had begun, one that would pit mercy against greed on a scale larger than he had ever imagined. Where gold is worshipped, ledgers become scripture. The entrance of the EFCC officers had turned the Golden Room from a sanctuary into a battlefield. Their boots echoed on the marble floors as they carried in files, evidence bags, and the authority of the state. Prince Adedayo stood frozen, mask of composure cracking with each word Mrs. Adebayo read aloud. Funds misappropriated, shell companies traced, wetland compensations siphoned. The elders gasped, some clutched their staffs tighter, others averted their eyes. Arinze, still seated on the floor near the veiled throne, watched in silence. He felt like a bystander in his own fate. He had not asked for any of this, yet here he was, the beggar whose act of mercy had drawn light into the palace's darkest corners. Ola pressed against his leg, steady and grounding, as though reminding him, "You belong here, even if you doubt it." Mrs. Adebayo, calm and precise, handed Inspector Halima a sealed list. "These are priority items, vault ledgers, foreign remittance logs, compensation files." Her tone carried no room for refusal. Together, they marched toward the royal vault. Odogwu, the steward, shuffled behind them, his steps heavy. He looked like a man torn between loyalty to the palace and guilt for what had festered within its walls. The vault's iron doors groaned open. Dust flew as Halima and Mrs. Adebayo hauled out ledgers stacked high, their bindings worn, ink smudged from years of concealment. Halima flipped through one and frowned. Columns of numbers didn't balance. Entries had been erased and rewritten. Offshore accounts were scribbled under false donor names. The deeper she looked, the worse it became. "This isn't just corruption," she muttered. "It's theft of generations." Odogwu cleared his throat. "It was Adedayo," he whispered, voice cracking. "When the wetlands were sold for oil, he handled the compensation. The people never saw a kobo. It vanished into his companies." His eyes glistened with shame. "I kept silent. I was afraid." Halima's gaze softened but remained firm. "Afraid is not excuse. Afraid cannot rebuild stolen lives." She ordered him to document everything he knew. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, Amaka's phone never stopped buzzing. Her video feed had exploded into a nationwide frenzy. She streamed live updates from her channel, her voice steady, her face resolute. "They call him the mercy beggar, but inside the palace he has already become a mirror, showing us what lies our rulers hide." Comments flooded in, some calling Arinze a saint, others warning of manipulation. But the hashtag number mercy beggar trended across the nation, a digital storm no one could control. Back in the side chamber, Arinze sat with Amaka when she slipped in to check on him. He leaned against the wall, head bowed, fingers locked. "Why me?" he murmured. "I am nothing, a beggar, a man who couldn't even feed himself. They call me chosen, but I feel like a fraud." Amaka knelt in front of him, placing her hand gently on his. "You are not nothing. You gave when you had nothing. That is why you were chosen. Don't let their power blind, are you? Mercy is power too." Her words steadied him, her eyes holding his with unspoken intimacy. The storm of politics raged around them, but here, in this quiet moment, they found something deeper, something that was not strategy or fate, but human connection. The first fragile threads of love wove themselves into their story. Elsewhere, the Council of Elders erupted into argument. Some pounded their staffs, declaring that tradition must be upheld. The mercy clause is sacred. We cannot ignore it. Others scoffed, insisting that the kingdom could not entrust its future to a man with no pedigree. "Bloodline rules kingdoms," one elder spat. "Mercy rules stories told to children." The chamber fractured between tradition and politics, their voices clashing like thunder. Halima, still sifting through files, stumbled upon one marked with a simple phrase, "Incident report, child. Fall." Her eyes narrowed as she flipped it open. Inside lay details of a palace tragedy from years ago, a child, no more than 5, who had fallen from the staircase during a power outage. Witness accounts were vague, and the case had been closed quietly, yet the description of the boy chilled her. A scar across the temple. Lost consciousness. Body never recovered. Halima's gaze lifted toward Arinze. Could it be? As if to confirm her suspicions, Ola trotted into the room carrying a ragged scrap of cloth in his jaws. It was torn, frayed, yet its weave matched the garments described in the file. He dropped it at Arinze's feet, wagging his tail. The beggar picked it up slowly, confusion flooding his face. I remember this," he whispered. Images surged stairs, a sudden push, a woman crying his name, Then darkness. His scar burned. Halima's chest tightened. If Arinze was the child from the file, then the palace had buried more than stolen wealth. It had buried a bloodline, a secret heir hidden in plain sight. Before she could speak, the world shattered. A deafening boom ripped through the palace air. The ground trembled. Shards of glass exploded inward. Smoke billowed as screams tore through the night. The palace car park had become an inferno, one of the vehicles engulfed in flames. Guards scrambled. Elders fled. Alarms shrieked. Halima dove for cover, shielding the files. Pain seared her arm as shrapnel grazed her skin, but she held tight. Mrs. Adebayo pulled her to her feet, coughing through the smoke. "Get Arinze out!" she shouted. The firelight painted the palace crimson. Bodies scrambled through the chaos. Among them lay a fallen officer, motionless, blood pooling around him. Halima staggered forward, grief ripping through her chest. He had been her junior partner, young, full of promise. Now he was gone, another casualty in a war for gold and power. As flames roared and sirens wailed, suspicion turned instantly to Adedayo. He had been cornered by evidence, and now blood had been spilled. But the fire had only just begun, and the war for the golden throne was about to claim more lives. When mercy rises, knives grow wings. The palace courtyard was still drenched in smoke and the acrid stench of burning fuel when Prince Adedayo emerged, his robe neatly draped as though chaos itself could not touch him. His voice rang out over the panicked crowd, calm and righteous. "These terrorists dare to strike at the palace of Ibadan, but I promise you justice will find them. The throne will not fall to cowards who hide behind bombs." His words carried through the cameras already broadcasting live. To the unknowing ear, he sounded like a protector. To those who had seen the EFCC evidence, he sounded like a man spinning a web before the walls closed in. Behind closed doors, his mask dropped. Adedayo's jaw clenched as he dialed his fixer, voice low and venomous. "You failed me once, you will not fail me again. That beggar must not live to see coronation day. Break him, and if he has grown too proud, tear him down, by ripping away what steadies him. Take the girl, make him crawl." While Adedayo plotted, Arinze lay on a cot in a guarded chamber, the explosion's shockwaves still echoing in his bones. His eyes were distant, unfocused, haunted. Halima sat beside him, taking notes with precision. "Tell me what you remember," she urged gently. His voice trembled. "I was small. 5, maybe 6. I was running up the stairs. There was laughter, then a shove. My head struck the rail. I remember a woman crying, 'Arinze!' Her voice cracked like thunder. Then, darkness. When I woke, I was not in the palace anymore. I was alone, always alone." Halima leaned forward, her face taut with the gravity of what she was hearing. "Arinze, this memory, combined with the report we found, could mean you are that lost child. If true, your claim is more than mercy. It is bloodline." He closed his eyes, pain etched across his features. "I don't want thrones. I don't want crowns. I just want peace." Halima's pen pressed hard against the page. "Peace will come only when truth is sealed." She slid the file into her bag and stamped it with her authority. "Testimony logged, under seal. This will not be buried." Hours later, EFCC forensics returned results on the car bomb. The evidence was damning. The explosives were traced to a warehouse owned by one of Adedayo's companies. Surveillance footage tied his driver to the vehicle hours before the blast. The trail was clear. Mrs. Adebayo looked grim as she laid the file before Halima. This was not terrorists. This was family. Blood is being spilled for the throne. The palace steward, Odogwu, found Halima in the archive room that evening. His face sagged with years of secrets, his hands trembling as he clutched a small package. "I cannot carry this any longer," he said hoarsely. He placed the object in her palm, a brass seal etched with the late Alafin's personal insignia. He told me, "If all else fails, give this to one who seeks truth. It opens more than doors. It opens the past." Halima studied the seal. It glinted in the lamplight, heavy with authority. She nodded. "Thank you, Odogwu. You may have just saved Ibadan." The old man wept quietly, his guilt finally spilling free. Meanwhile, the council gathered again in the Hall of Elders. Priestess Ijioma's voice rose above their weary debates. The coronation must hold in 2 days. If we delay, the oath weakens. If we yield to fear, we shame the ancestors. The beggar chosen by mercy has endured tests of hunger and of fire. He must be brought to the throne. Some elders nodded in agreement, though others muttered in dissent. Adedayo stood apart, arms folded, his expression unreadable. Inside, fury churned. He had tried subtlety poison, plots, bombs. The beggar lived still, and the dog would not abandon him. Tradition bound their hands, law hemmed his power. If he could not kill Arinze outright, he would break him another way. That evening, under cover of the storm, Amaka closed her tea stand and prepared to visit Arinze. She carried with her fresh bread, wrapped carefully, wanting to remind him of the moment everything began. Her heart raced as she walked the narrow alley, the rain soaking her wrapper, her sandals slipping on wet stone. She thought of his eyes when he doubted himself, of the way he had whispered, "Why me?" She wanted to tell him why. She wanted to tell him that mercy had not only chosen him, it had chosen them both. But she never reached the palace. As she turned the corner, a van screeched to a halt. The doors flew open, and rough hands grabbed her, dragging her inside. She screamed, struggling, the bread tumbling into the gutter, dissolving in the rain. "Arinze!" she cried. But her voice was swallowed by the storm. The van doors slammed shut, its tires spitting water as it tore into the night. In the distance, a howl split the rain. Ola, the mastiff, had seen it happen. His paws splashed through puddles as he gave chase, his barks echoing like gunfire through the alleys. Amaka vanished into the storm, stolen by Adedayo's men. Ola's pursuit was desperate, but Arinze had not yet heard the news. The beggar chosen by mercy was about to face the greatest wound of all, watching love torn from him in the name of power. In the hour of thunder, even the city listens to dogs. The rain hammered Ibadan that night as if the heavens themselves had joined the conflict. Lightning tore jagged wounds across the sky, and thunder rolled like a war drum over rooftops and rivers. The storm was no longer background, it was part of the story, carrying with it fear, fury, and an omen of what was to come. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. Word had reached Inspector Halima that Amaka had been taken, dragged screaming into a van that disappeared into the flood of streets. Arinze's face was a mask of grief and fury, his hands shaking, his breath ragged. Ola paced back and forth, barking furiously, ears alert, nose flaring. The mastiff's growls cut sharper than any alarm. "Calm yourself, Arinze," Halima urged, though her own voice shook with urgency. "We will find her. The city is wide, but it is not endless, and the van cannot outrun both storm and law. Pull traffic camera feeds, every major junction from Bodija to the riverside." Technicians scrambled, monitors lighting up with images of blurred headlights cutting through the downpour. One by one, cameras tracked the van, its license plate flashing intermittently under street lamps. Halima's pen stabbed the map. Heading south, toward the riverside depots, they'll want isolation, a place where thunder swallows screams. Arinze's chest heaved as memories swarmed the shove on the staircase, the cry of his name, the darkness. Once again, someone he loved had been ripped from him, and once again, shadows threatened to erase him. But this time, he swore, he would not be the helpless child. He would fight. The van screeched into a riverside warehouse district, a maze of corrugated iron and rusted cranes, where the Ogun River swelled against its banks. Amaka sat bound on a chair, wrists bruised from the ropes. Her captors muttered nervously, checking their watches. A lantern swung overhead, casting long shadows on the damp concrete floor. She whispered Arinze's name under her breath like a prayer, each repetition lending her strength. "Break her spirit," the fixer barked, pacing the room. "The beggar must watch her crumble if he is to kneel." He placed a phone before her, its camera trained on her trembling form. "Speak. Say you renounce him. Say you were part of the trick." Amaka lifted her chin. Though fear tightened her chest, her voice did not break. "I will not lie for you. He gave bread when he had nothing. That truth is stronger than your chains." Fury twisted the fixer's face. He slapped her, hard enough to split her lip. "Then you will die with him." But outside, The storm had delivered hunters of its own. EFCC vans rolled silently into the depot yard, their tires splashing through puddles. Halima led the charge, pistol drawn, her eyes glinting like fire under the rain. At her side, Ola sniffed the air, then bolted, paws pounding, nose locked on Amaka's scent. His bark exploded into the night. The fixer spun toward the sound. "What?" His words were cut short by the shattering of doors. EFCC officers stormed in, shouting commands, their boots striking the floor like thunder. Gunfire cracked, sparks lit the shadows. Arinze ran in behind them, eyes blazing. The fixer tried to flee, but Ola launched himself, teeth clamping down on his arm, dragging him to the ground. Halima kicked the gun from his hand and cuffed him. On the table beside him lay a laptop, its screen still open. Halima's gaze sharpened. "Seize it." And the revelations poured out like poison. Names of elders, their bribes carefully recorded. Offshore transactions linking Adedayo's shell companies to foreign accounts. Blackmail folders with photographs of council members compromised in shadowy deals. Proof that the palace had long been a web of corruption, and Adedayo the spider at its center. Amaka's eyes filled with tears when Arinze knelt before her, untying her bonds with trembling hands. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You will never lose me," she breathed, pressing her forehead to his. Blood dripped from her lip, but her spirit burned stronger than ever. Their embrace was brief but fierce, a promise forged in storm and danger. Halima interrupted gently but firmly. "We don't have time for comfort. This evidence must reach the council. The people must know before Adedayo strikes again." She glanced at the fixer, now chained, his face pale with defeat. "And this rat will sing once he's under questioning." The EFCC convoy returned to the palace before dawn, files secured, prisoners loaded. Word of the raid spread quickly. Citizens whispered that Mercy's chosen had not only endured but fought back against corruption. Crowds began gathering outside the palace gates, singing praise, ululating, demanding that the coronation proceed. The elders convened, shaken by the evidence, humbled by their own exposure. With trembling voices, they declared, "The Mercy coronation shall take place at dawn." Priestess Ijeoma's staff struck the floor 3 times, sealing the decision. In his chamber, Arinze stood at the window, the first light of morning creeping over the horizon. Amaka stood beside him, her hand clasped in his. Ola lay at their feet, chest rising and falling in exhausted sleep. For the first time in his life, Arinze felt both fear and hope surging together, a storm not of destruction but of rebirth. The path before him was heavy with burden. But no longer could he deny it. Mercy had chosen him, and he could not turn away. But as peace briefly touched the palace, shadows still moved. A guard slipped into Halima's office, his face pale. He bent low and whispered urgently into her ear. Her eyes widened. She looked toward the council chamber, where elders celebrated their decision, and then toward Arinze, who stood unaware of the danger creeping closer. "Adedayo," the guard breathed, his voice barely audible over the distant thunder. "He is not finished. He is heading for the golden throne tonight." The warning struck like lightning. The battle for the throne had not ended with ledgers and raids. It was about to ignite in the heart of the palace itself, where mercy and ambition would finally collide. When truth is announced, lies wear their finest clothes. The palace glittered with deceptive beauty that night. Chandeliers blazed, casting rivers of light across polished marble floors. Coral beads glistened on the necks of chiefs and aristocrats. Musicians strummed soft juju rhythms, the kind that masked unease behind a veil of harmony. It was announced as a tribute to the late Alafin, but in truth, the gala was Adedayo's last performance, an attempt to dress lies in regalia, to smother scandal with spectacle. Outside the gates, the city buzzed with tension. Crowds gathered, half in hope, half in anger. Banners of the Mercy Beggar fluttered beside placards declaring loyalty to bloodline. Inside, however, wine flowed, and dignitaries mingled, their laughter too rehearsed, their eyes darting with suspicion. They had seen the EFCC raids, they had heard whispers of accounts seized, elders disgraced. Still, they came, because wealth and power have always drawn moths even to flames. Prince Adedayo entered last, draped in ancestral agbada embroidered with gold thread. His coral crown gleamed under the chandeliers, and the ceremonial sword hung at his side. its hilt wrapped in crimson cloth. He walked with the ease of a man accustomed to applause, and the room rewarded him with polite claps and murmured greetings. He raised a hand, smiling like a benevolent father addressing restless children. "Tonight," he began, voice rich and commanding, "we gather not in sorrow but in unity. The elephant has gone, but his blood lives on. Ibadan must not be fractured by foreign forces or street theatrics. Mercy is noble, yes, but thrones are built on lineage, discipline, and strength. I offer you continuity, stability, and honor to our ancestors." His words flowed smoothly, crafted for ears eager for reassurance. Heads nodded, glasses clinked, but in the shadows, dissent brewed. Amaka, hidden among the palace staff, adjusted the small camera she had concealed in her scarf. Halima moved along the periphery of the hall, her eyes sharp, her voice low into the transmitter. "All feeds connected. When I give the signal, the truth speaks louder than his lies." Ola, seated near Arinze at the edge of the gathering, watched intently, the dog's gaze never leaving Adedayo. The mastiff growled once, a low rumble that made Arinze rest a calming hand on his head. As Adedayo launched into another praise-laden verse about bloodline destiny, Halima gave the signal. A flicker pulsed across the massive LED screens lining the walls. The gala's tribute slideshow portraits of past kings, images of festivals glitched, then vanished. In its place appeared rows of numbers, documents, signatures, offshore accounts, EFCC seals, videos of Adedayo's fixer confessing, photographs of elders accepting bribes. Gasps erupted. Guests recoiled as their glasses trembled in their hands. Donors, once eager to align with Adedayo's unity, stepped back as if his very robes carried contagion. A murmur rose into a roar. "Thief! Liar!" Adedayo's smile faltered, his mask slipping. For the first time, his composure cracked. "No!" he barked, his voice sharp, desperate. He stormed toward the control panel, slamming his palm against the switches. "Cut the power." Darkness swallowed the hall for a heartbeat. But then, a generator groaned to life. The screens lit again, brighter than before, evidence cascading across them like waves of truth that refused to be silenced. The room was bathed not in gold but in the harsh, undeniable light of exposure. Arinze stood at the back, his robe still plain white, untouched by regalia. He felt eyes pressing on him, whispers urging, "Sit now, claim it. The throne is yours." But he shook his head. To sit early, to seize the moment in chaos, would be greed. Mercy demanded patience. He folded his arms across his chest and remained standing. Priestess Ijeoma stepped forward, her staff striking the marble with a resonant crack. The hall fell into silence. She bent over Ola, anointing the mastiff's head with palm oil. "You were chosen to witness," she intoned. "The dog of the Alafin now blesses the beggar of mercy. What no man can silence, the spirit will confirm." Arinze bowed his head, humbled, as Ola pressed against him, the symbol of mercy made flesh. The guests looked between the man in white robes and the prince in glittering regalia, their minds torn between tradition and corruption, truth and spectacle. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again. This time, it was no glitch. A sharp metallic clang rang out. The veil covering the golden throne, untouched since the Alafin's death, fluttered and fell to the floor. Gasps filled the hall, and there, standing beside the throne with the ceremonial sword in his grip, was Adedayo. His crown tilted, his face contorted with rage, he raised the blade high. The gala turned into a stage for violence. The sword gleamed under the trembling light, and the room knew in that instant that unity had collapsed. Bloodline and mercy would clash not in whispers, but in steel. Gold draws moths and flames. The air inside the palace hall had shifted. Where moments earlier music and polite applause had cloaked corruption, now tension hung so thick it was difficult to breathe. The veil that once covered the golden throne lay crumpled on the marble floor like shed skin. Beside it stood Prince Adedayo, eyes blazing with desperation, ceremonial sword raised high. "By blood and blade," he roared, voice cracking under the weight of fury. His words rang out, not as a proclamation of honor, but as a curse hurled against fate itself. He advanced toward the throne, determined to claim it not through tradition or mercy, but through violence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elders stumbled backward, Women screamed. Guards drew weapons uncertainly, unsure whether to protect the throne or the people. But Arinze stepped forward, the plain white robe still clinging to his frame, rainwater stains dark against its fabric. He raised his voice above the panic, strong and unshaken. "Stop, Adedayo. The throne does not belong to blood alone. It belongs to mercy. It belongs to justice. The oath binds us all. You cannot rewrite what the Alafin himself decreed." His words carried with the force of conviction, echoing through the chamber. The people in the gallery leaned closer, their whispers shifting from fear to awe. Priestess Ijeoma struck her staff against the floor, each crack louder than the last. She began to chant in Yoruba, her voice deep, rhythmic, invoking the ancestors. One by one, elders who had wavered began to respond, their voices trembling but rising in chorus. Tradition had awoken, and it stood behind Arinze. Adedayo sneered. "You think chance will stop steel?" With a roar, he charged. But Ola was faster. The mastiff launched forward, teeth sinking into Adedayo's arm. The sword clattered to the ground, spinning across the marble before skidding to a stop at Arinze's feet. Blood bloomed across Adedayo's sleeve as he cried out, rage turning into shock. Chaos erupted. Guards surged forward, some loyal to Adedayo, others swayed by the rising tide of mercy. Blades clashed, fists flew, shouts rose above the storm outside. Inspector Halima shoved through the melee, her pistol drawn, her eyes scanning for threats. "Secure the corridor!" she barked. EFCC officers pushed in behind her, shields raised, forming a barrier around the throne. They weren't empty-handed. Officers rolled in heavy carts laden with ledgers, computers, and evidence seized from the Riverside raid. Screens flickered to life once again, showing transaction trails, bribes, and video confessions. The truth could no longer be buried. It marched into the hall alongside the law. Amaka clutched her scarf, her heart in her throat as she watched Arinze stand tall, unarmed yet unyielding. He had become more than the beggar she first saw beneath the flyover. In this moment, he was a man carrying the weight of an entire kingdom, his every word and action shaping the fate of Ibadan. Cornered, bloodied, yet still defiant, Adedayo spat venom. "You think mercy makes you king? You think scraps given to dogs make you worthy? Let me tell you what truly crowns a man. Fear, power, ruthlessness." The hall quieted as another voice cut in, hoarse, trembling, but resolute. It was Odogwu, the aging steward, his staff clutched tight as he stepped into the center of the storm. His eyes glistened, his shoulders sagged under decades of silence. "I cannot carry this secret any longer," he said, voice breaking. He pointed a shaking finger at Adedayo. "I saw you. You pushed the child on the staircase. You tried to erase him so you could stand where you stand now. I buried my guilt in silence, but no more. The scar on his temple is your crime, Adedayo. And the boy you tried to kill lives still." A stunned silence fell. All eyes turned to Arinze. The scar that had marked him since childhood now burned under the scrutiny of hundreds. Gasps rose like waves. Could it be? Could the beggar be? Not only Mercy's choice, but bloodline as well. Adedayo's face drained of color, then twisted into rage. "Lies! Senile lies!" he shouted, though his trembling betrayed him. Halima stepped forward, her voice like iron. "We have the file. We have the witness. We have the cloth scrap the dog retrieved, matching the report. The evidence is no longer whispers, it is truth." The crowd erupted. Some cried in shock. Others fell to their knees, hands lifted in prayer. Amaka's eyes filled with tears, her hand gripping Arinze's tightly. She whispered, "It was always you. Even before mercy, it was always you." Adedayo, cornered and wild, stumbled backward. His heels struck the base of the throne, and for the first time, fear clouded his eyes. He looked less like a prince and more like a man drowning in his own sins. But before the guards could seize him, a low creak echoed behind the throne. All heads turned. Slowly, almost reverently, a hidden panel slid open. Within the recess was a shrine, long concealed. Candles, half burnt, flickered faintly. Offerings of palm wine and cola nuts lay scattered, forgotten by time. And in the center, framed by brass, hung a portrait. It depicted a young boy, no more than 6. His hair was cropped short, his eyes wide with innocence, and across his temple ran the faint outline of a scar, identical to the one etched into Arinze's flesh. The hall fell into stunned silence. Mercy had already claimed him, but now bloodline itself reached from the shadows of the past to crown him. The beggar was no beggar. He was the boy lost to treachery, the heir hidden in plain sight. Blood tells stories. Mercy decides endings. The hidden shrine glowed faintly in the half-light, its brass frame reflecting the storm of emotions now raging through the palace hall. The portrait of the young boy seemed to stare back at the crowd, innocent yet accusing, as though demanding to know why the truth had been buried so long. His scar, etched in the same place as Arinze's, spoke louder than words. Gasps and whispers filled the chamber. Elders shifted nervously, some clutching their beads, others muttering prayers. The revelation was no longer just symbolic, it was evidence. Mercy had already chosen Arinze, but now blood itself whispered his name. Priestess Ijeoma stepped forward, her staff striking the marble. She leaned close to the frame, brushing away dust that had gathered over years of concealment. Beneath the portrait, scratched faintly into the brass, lay an inscription. She read it aloud, her voice trembling but firm. Arinze, my sister's son, hidden for protection. The hall erupted, shouts overlapped. The lost child, heir by blood, the mercy beggar is no beggar at all. Some elders rose to their feet in outrage, others in awe. The weight of centuries of tradition and betrayal pressed down on every soul present. Adedayo stumbled forward, face ashen, hands trembling. Lies, he hissed, his voice cracking. Fabrications planted to deceive us all. Do not be blinded by tricks. But his protest rang hollow. His voice was drowned out by the rising tide of shock and anger. Odogwu, the weary steward, stepped into the center of the storm. His shoulders sagged, his eyes wet with decades of guilt. No more lies, he whispered, then louder. I was there, I saw it. The boy was pushed, the child was meant to die. Adedayo feared that mercy would one day favor him, so he sought to erase him. He pointed a trembling finger at the prince, his lips quivering. I watched as he fell. I heard the woman cry, his name Arinze. I thought the boy had perished, but the Alafin concealed the truth. He placed the child beyond Adedayo's reach, hidden among the poor, guarded only by fate. A heavy silence followed. Then, chaos broke again. Guards surged forward, seizing Adedayo. He struggled, thrashing, spitting curses. You fools! Do you think beggars can rule kingdoms? Do. You think feeding scraps to dogs makes a king? You'll all regret this. You'll see Ibadan burn. His words were cut off as EFCC officers cuffed his wrists and forced him to his knees. Cameras caught every moment, broadcasting across the nation. The image of a prince, bound and broken, stood in stark contrast to the man in plain white robes who had won the city's heart with mercy. Inspector Halima stepped forward, her expression carved from stone. By authority of the EFCC, Prince Adedayo, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted assassination, fraud, embezzlement, and treason against the people of Ibadan. She ordered him taken away. His cries echoed down the corridor, swallowed by the storm outside. But even as justice tightened its grip on Adedayo, the hall remained restless. The inscription had not just exposed treachery, it had raised questions too heavy to ignore. Ijeoma raised her staff once more. We cannot settle this with whispers. If bloodline must confirm what mercy has already declared, then let it be proven. She turned to Halima. Order the test. Halima nodded sharply. Within minutes, medical staff were summoned. A quick swab was taken from Arinze's mouth, sealed, and rushed to the laboratory. Emergency priority, Halima commanded. Results within hours. Arinze stood rigid as the process unfolded. His heart pounded, his thoughts a storm. He wanted to shout, to run, to demand why life had been so cruel as to throw him into this maelstrom. But he stood still, white robes clinging to his frame, eyes clouded with doubt. Mercy had called him, and now blood threatened to crown him. The weight was suffocating. Amaka, still shaken from her kidnapping but refusing to leave his side, stepped closer. She reached for his hand, her fingers soft but firm. Breathe, Arinze, she whispered. You are not alone. He turned toward her, eyes brimming. If the test confirms, If I am of this blood, then, what am I? A beggar or a prince? Chosen or cursed? Her grip tightened. You are the man who fed when he was hungry. You are the one who shared bread when the world looked away. That is who you are. Mercy chose you before blood ever did. Don't let their names bury yours. Her words steadied him, though the storm inside refused to relent. He bowed his head against hers briefly, drawing strength from her presence. For the first time in hours, he allowed himself to believe that he could face whatever truth awaited. But outside the palace, truth had stirred another storm. Crowds had gathered, swelled by rumor and rage. Word had spread that the beggar was being declared heir, and not all accepted it. Men shouted into megaphones, their voices sharp with scorn. "No beggar on the throne," they cried. "Ibadan must not bow to scraps." Others shouted back in defiance, chanting Arinze's name, holding up loaves of bread as symbols of mercy. The sound reached the palace gates, a rising tide of conflict. Elders peered nervously toward the noise, fear spreading like a contagion. "If the mob turns violent, we cannot control them," one muttered. Another shook his head. "Mercy divides as much as it unites. Blood alone may calm them." Inside, Arinze heard the distant chants, his stomach twisted. It was not only the council he would have to face, it was the people, and they were split between worship and rejection. He glanced at Amaka, whose eyes were filled with fire. "They don't know you yet," she said. "But they will. Show them mercy, even when they spit at it." The hours stretched painfully. Guards patrolled nervously. EFCC officers secured files. Elders whispered behind closed doors. And still, the storm outside grew louder, louder, until it rattled the palace walls. At last, a courier sprinted into the hall, breathless, clutching an envelope. He bowed before Halima, his chest heaving. "The results?" he panted. "The DNA." But before anyone could break the seal, another sound crashed into the hall, the mob outside, now chanting in thunderous unison, "No beggar on the throne." The voices of the people thundered against the palace, threatening to drown mercy before the truth could be unveiled. The storm was no longer only inside the palace walls, it was outside, demanding to be reckoned with. Crowns are heaviest when the crowd is watching. The chants outside the palace walls grew into thunder. "No beggar on the throne," thousands cried, fists pumping, banners swaying. The mob surged like a tide, their anger spilling into the narrow streets, threatening to breach the gates. Guards braced themselves, shields raised, but fear quaked even in their eyes. Inside, Arinze stood stiff, his hands trembling at his sides. The portrait inscription, the testimony of Odogwu, the DNA swab, it had all driven him toward the truth. But now the voices of his own people roared rejection. Mercy had elevated him, but the crowd demanded bloodline, demanded perfection, demanded the impossible. Inspector Halima moved quickly, her voice calm but commanding. She stepped into the courtyard, a loudspeaker in hand. "People of Ibadan, hold your anger. The throne is not yet decided. Truth is being tested. Let justice speak before chaos swallows us all." Her words slowed the tide, though fists still shook in the air. Murmurs replaced shouts, uncertainty threading into the mob. Then came the women. Dozens of market women, wrappers soaked from the morning rain, baskets balanced on their heads. They walked slowly, deliberately, toward the palace gates. One by one, they lowered their baskets and began laying loaves of bread at the threshold. Each loaf was wrapped in cloth, humble yet profound. "Let mercy feed us first," one of them said, her voice carrying above the restless mob. "We are the mothers of Ibadan. We have seen hunger. We have buried children. We know the weight of mercy. Do not spit on it." Others joined her cry. "Mercy is food before titles. Mercy is bread before crowns." The crowd faltered. Men shifted uneasily, anger dampened by the women's courage. Children darted forward, picking up crumbs and eating with joy. In the midst of tension, the sight of bread silenced the storm. And then Ola, the mastiff, made the decision for them all. The dog padded slowly through the open palace doors, ignoring guards, ignoring shouts. He walked to the pile of bread, sniffed it, and then turned, padding deliberately back into the hall. He sat firmly at Arinze's feet, his body pressed against the man's leg, eyes shining with loyalty. The effect was electric. The mob that had shouted rejection just moments earlier fell silent. Even the angriest among them could not deny the symbolism. The royal mastiff, heir of kings, had chosen, not wealth, not bloodline, not regalia but mercy. Inside, tension thickened as Halima tore open the envelope containing the DNA test results. The elders leaned forward, sweat beading their brows. The room was still but for the rustle of paper. She read aloud, her voice measured. Test confirms kinship to the royal line. Probability, 99.97%. Arinze is of the blood of the Alafin. Gasps erupted once more. The whispers of doubt evaporated into cries of awe. Elders shifted uncomfortably, some hiding their shame, others lifting their heads as though relieved. Priestess Ijeoma raised her staff, her voice echoing. Mercy chose him, blood affirms him. The ancestors will not be mocked, the throne must honor both. The council of elders took their vote. One by one, staffs struck the marble, each thud a verdict. At last, the decision was unanimous, or at least forced by the weight of revelation. They turned to Arinze. You shall be custodian of the throne, Ijeoma declared. Not tyrant, not pawn, custodian. The mercy that fed the dog will feed the people. The crown shall be heavy, but it will not crush you if you work. Kneel before the people first. Arinze trembled, his heart pounding, but he stepped forward. Slowly, he lowered himself to his knees before the golden throne. He did not rush to sit upon it. Instead, he bowed his head. I vow, he said, voice raw but steady, that no child in Ibadan will starve while I breathe. I vow that mercy will not be a story whispered in rain, but a law written in bread. The elders murmured blessings. Market women clapped, ululating in joy. Even some of the mob outside joined in, their cries shifting from rage to chants of praise. Amaka wept openly, her hands clasped to her chest, pride shining in her eyes. But peace was fragile, and fate had not finished weaving its threads. A courier entered the hall, his face pale, his clothes dripping rain. He clutched a sealed envelope marked with a dark insignia, a coiled serpent over reeds. He bowed low, offering it with trembling hands. Message for the custodian, he whispered, from the Wetlands Syndicate. The words chilled the hall. For years, the wetlands had been the source of fortune and corruption alike, lands whose sale had funded Adedayo's crimes. If the syndicate was moving now, it meant one truth. The battle for Ibadan was not over. Arinze held the envelope, its seal cold and ominous in his hand. The chants outside dimmed in his ears as he stared at it. The throne was not only a crown of mercy, it was a battlefield of shadows yet to be fought. The river keeps flowing, a throne is only a bridge. The envelope felt heavier than its weight suggested. The serpent and reeds insignia pressed cold against Arinze's palm as if daring him to open it. Around him, elders and officers held their breath. He broke the seal slowly, eyes moving across the pages. Each line struck like a hammer. The Wetlands Syndicate was not a single ring, it was a vast web, stretching across states, binding chiefs, businessmen, and politicians into one greedy knot. Names of governors, contractors, and even rival kingdoms filled the letter. The corruption that had rotted Ibadan's palace was merely one branch of a poisoned tree. He looked up, face grim. It is not finished. Mercy has cracked open the palace, but the river of greed flows wider than our walls. If we dam it here, it will flood elsewhere. We must change not just a throne, but a nation. The council stirred uneasily. Tradition had guided them for centuries, but Arinze was speaking of storms beyond their reach. Yet his words carried the weight of truth, and silence met him. Days blurred into a tide of decisions. Arinze refused pomp or endless feasts. Instead, his first order as custodian was simple. Bread. If mercy is our crown, he declared, let it feed before it shines. Free bread stands rose in the markets, staffed by volunteers, overseen by elders and EFCC monitors. Market women wept with gratitude as children lined up, loaves in hand, their laughter echoing in alleys once ruled by hunger. Arinze walked among them, robe still plain, hands open, listening more than speaking. The wetlands were next. Contracts were frozen, fraudulent sales annulled. Halima led a task force to reclaim stolen lands. For the first time in years, fishermen cast nets without fear of eviction, Farmers tilled soil without bribery. The river, once strangled by greed, began to breathe again. Audits followed. Accounts once hidden were dragged into light. Elders who had pocketed funds faced questioning. Some wept, others confessed, still others resisted. Halima's officers moved steadily, their files thick with evidence. Mrs. Adebayo promised, "This is only the beginning. If mercy crowns one man, it must weigh on all." Amaka never left Arinze's side. Her camera captured every decree, every vow, every bread stand opened, every wetland restored. Her documentary spread like wildfire across Nigeria, The Beggar Who Chose Mercy. Viewers watched the man who had shared bread with a stray dog now shaping the destiny of a kingdom. The world called him the Bread King, but to Amaka, he was simply Arinze, the man who still trembled when the crowd roared, the man who whispered gratitude each night for breath and love. Priestess Ijeoma took the oath of mercy and inscribed it into coronation law. "Every king henceforth," she declared, "must pass the mercy test, to feed the unguided hungry before he is crowned." Her staff cracked against the marble, sealing the law and tradition. For the first time in centuries, mercy was not just a virtue, it was statute. At last, the coronation dawn arrived. The hall filled once more, but this time not with masks or lies. The golden throne stood unveiled, polished until it gleamed like the river under sunlight. Arinze approached slowly, each step echoing the weight of his journey from the flyover to the palace, from beggar to custodian. He turned, addressing the hall before sitting. "This throne is not mine," he said. "It is yours. It is the market woman's, the child's, the fisherman's, the farmer's. I will sit not to be served, but to serve." He lowered himself carefully, beads laid heavy across his shoulders. Ola sat at his feet, head raised proudly, the living witness of mercy's oath. Thunderous applause shook the palace. Outside, crowds erupted into cheers. Bells rang. The beggar of mercy had become the custodian of Ibadan. Later, when the hall emptied and the celebrations dulled, Arinze and Amaka slipped away. They walked along the riverbank, hand in hand, their robes brushing against reeds swaying in the breeze. The storm clouds had passed, and the water gleamed with sunset hues. Ola padded beside them, tail wagging gently. "This river will outlive us," Arinze murmured. "Thrones pass, crowns fall. But if we build schools, shelters, bread houses, those will last longer than names carved in stone." Amaka smiled, her eyes soft with hope. "Then let us build them together, not as prince and servant, but as two who knew hunger and chose mercy." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a rare moment, the custodian of a kingdom felt only like a man in love. But mercy's work was never done. As they turned back toward the palace, Ola stiffened, ears pricked. From the shadows emerged another hound, limping, bleeding from the flank. Its eyes were glazed with exhaustion, but determination burned within them. Around its neck hung a cracked brass tag, identical to Ola's but stamped with the insignia of a neighboring kingdom. The dog collapsed at Arinze's feet, panting. Its arrival was a message written in blood and brass. The river of corruption flowed beyond Ibadan's borders. Mercy's battle was not over, it had only just begun. Arinze lifted the wounded hound gently in his arms, the brass tag cold against his skin. Another kingdom called, another oath awaited. The river flowed on, and mercy would have to follow. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful Nigerian folktales of mercy, betrayal, and destiny. Share this video with friends so the message of compassion spreads wider. And tell me in the comments, do you believe mercy can truly change kingdoms?